Kong Bonanza was the biggest release of July 17, 2025. It was the second reboot of a beloved IP, the first being the original Donkey Kong Country. It was this phenomenal new take on the character that reinvented this creature that's been prevalent in video games since the very beginning. Donkey Kong is an iconic video game character that has stood the test of time. He is the complete opposite of Pac-Man. I am not kidding you. Everything you see in this footage is real. This is supposed to be a Pac-Man game. Like, this, to me, is just a really shining example of just how much better Nintendo handles their iconic brand compared to the competition. Because Donkey Kong is this completely new, original idea that's been built up over several years that takes all these aspects from the character and just blends them all together in this new, unique, innovative way. What does Namco do with Pac-Man? Oh, let's turn it into Souls. And that's exactly what this is. If you take away all of all the obvious grievances people have with that idea, the fact that Souls doesn't have giant robots and Souls isn't 2D, no. If you ignore all of that, if you look at the actual gameplay mechanics and how the game is structured and how it plays, and the layout and the themes and the ideas and the story and the way the characters are presented and the animations, this is a Souls game. And I think it's a testament to just how irrelevant the Souls-like genre has become, where something like this can be slapped onto Pac-Man and just go completely under the radar. We are oversaturated with this garbage to the point where marketers deliberately try and misrepresent these games as being more Metroid inspired, because Metroid has a lot more respect among gamers. It's a higher quality brand. It's a way more respectable IP. They're far higher quality. Everybody loves Metroid. Nobody likes Souls. And the sheer fact that so many of these clones are coming out and just failing to reach an audience in spite of being tied into major pre-existing IPs, it just goes to show you just how the Souls formula cannot survive without the very specific FromSlop terminally online audience. Without those plebs hyping up everything FromSlop does, general audiences would realize very quickly that these games are derivative of one another. They're slow, they're clunky, they're uninspired, and above all else, they're not fun to play. I cannot begin to tell you just how many times I personally have played a Souls clone over the past couple of years, only for it to turn out to be completely broken and unplayable and uninspired. It's a common problem with these games, is that developers see just how cheap Souls games look, just how derivative they are, just how much they reuse the same assets over and over again, and they realize that I can do that too, and so they just make a copy of it. But the weird thing is that the copies sometimes are just, they just go completely off the rails, and they just have no basis in what people actually enjoy about From Software games. The fact that they were so original and distinct when they first came on the scene in 2008. At this point, the FromSlop formula is on par with Call of Duty or the first-person shooter thing. It has been done to death. There is no innovation. There is no evolution, especially within FromSlop themselves. And as a result of that, companies like Namco Bandai are just resorting to extreme tactics to try and tie their iconic brands into this fad, right? FromSlop is, in essence, the MCU of gaming. It has that same terminally online fan base, people who get excited over every little thing that happens, people who have like no perspective on like what's good and what's not, people who just consume whatever the brand tells them to consume. Namco wants that for all of their brands. And I imagine that's why they've put out games like Code Vein, which didn't have anything to do with From Software, and now this Shadow Labyrinth, their most iconic of iconic brands, Pac-Man, has been relegated to a cheap, shallow Souls clone. And it's just kind of appalling to me, someone who currently holds the record in my local Pac-Man machine, how this travesty is like even allowed to exist. Because when I first saw the trailer for this, I thought to myself that like that might actually be cool. A Metroid-like Pac-Man game where you're like going around finding power-ups, fighting ghosts. Something that recontextualizes the Pac-Man formula. Because I've been thinking about this for a while. Like, Pac-Man is one of those brands that's never really evolved past the arcade. Nothing they've done outside of that really stuck. And I think a big part of that is because they never really explain like what exactly Pac-Man is or what he's doing or what the deal with the ghosts are. It's just entirely left up to your imagination if you like care to think about such things. Like, it's just a video game. And to a certain extent, that's admirable. It's why the game is such like an icon. But at the same time, this has led to the brand just struggling to find any kind of like relevancy in the modern day because it hasn't been able to evolve. It hasn't been able to grow and like do new things with the brand and the idea and the character, right? Like I think it says a lot when like the most famous Pac-Man sequel, Miss Pac-Man, like wasn't even developed internally by Namco, right? It was a ROM hack of people who were bored of playing like the standard Pac-Man. So with all that being said, how does Shadow Labyrinth hold up? As a Pac-Man game, as a Souls-like, how is this game? Like, it is, I think, the worst game I've played this year. Like, I can't think of anything else that, like, I've bought randomly and played that, like, I dislike more than this. I'll have to go back through my backlog, but, like, I don't make a habit of buying, like, cheap, like, low budget slop like this anymore. But, like, I bought this because of the Pac-Man license. I gave it a shot, and it really is some of the most try-hard, like, dark, just ridiculous, like, ridiculously like poorly put together things I've ever seen in my life. Like, it doesn't look good, right? It looks cheap. It looks like one of those like flash games you would play on your school computer in fifth grade. It just seems like they didn't know how to make the game fun. Like it's like they thought that like the just throwing the Pac-Man aesthetic into like this dark sci-fi like world would like get people just frothing at the mouth. They seriously probably thought that people would give a shit about the lore or like the implications or what was going on. I remember when they showed this in the Nintendo Direct, they kind of said that. They're like, oh man, you'll learn the secrets about Puck. Well, you'll have to play the game in order to do that. And I've tried playing the game twice, okay? Like, and really, the only reason I even tried like doing that was because like I really wanted to see how bad it gets. But it's like consistently bad. There is no evolution, there is no growth, there is no feeling that like the game is building up to something. It's just some shallow Souls clone with a Pac-Man skin. And to me, I do think it needs to be repeated just how derelict and just how outdated this formula is. It was downright frustrating, going to these areas, seeing how basic they were, seeing how like floaty the controls were, how like awful the combat was, and realizing that like this is something that Namco seriously put out. They greenlit this. They seriously thought this would be a good way to put Pac-Man in the public eye, by putting him in Dark Souls. And like, look when the original trailer premiered, like I thought they were gonna do something with this. I thought it was gonna be like they had some grand plan, some great idea, but like no. Like the reality is this looks just as terrible as it sounds. Pac-Man in Dark Souls. Like I thought maybe it would be enjoyable in a kind of like I in a kind of ironic postmodern way, but the game really is that terrible and really should be considered one of the year's worst.